My topic is the relationship between Joanna and Stedman. John Stedman being a Caucasian Marine officer and the time that he spent with a young slave woman named Joanna. My paper is about the connection between Joanna and Stedman and the deeper relationship that they shared, and not just a man sleeping with a woman. The thesis of my paper is that despite the differences between Joanna and Stedman, that they did have a meaningful relationship in spite of the social conditions that surrounded them. Could Joanna and Stedman have had a meaningful relationship if Joanna were not a slave? The secondary literature that I used was that of David Erdman, who wrote Blake's Vision of Slavery, and argued that at the time of the relationship between Joanna and Stedman, many interracial relationships or marriages were out of convenience and often times seen as a benefit for the slave woman who was seeking more privileges and the status that came from being married to a free man. Another point that Erdman argued was that for Stedman it was a dilemma of social and sexual. The Englishman entangled in the ethical code of property and propriety. My second author is Joyce McDonald, who wrote The Disappearing African Woman. In it, she argues that female slaves were sexually exploited and abused by their masters, and that white men were often excused from their responsibility as fathers when they fathered children with slave women. As a result of this, slave women many times would silence themselves under these circumstances, and as a result, there is not much historically recorded about the feelings or thoughts of these women. What McDonald suggests in her writing is that Stedman's marriage to Johanna was a Suriname marriage, a marriage out of the convenience of being in Suriname and having a young mulatto woman to preserve his linens, cook his food, and to be a wet nurse or bed maid when he fell ill. The main findings that I found to be interesting for my search was that Stedman had spent much of his youth sympathizing with animals and small creatures, and it carried over into his adult life. There was an instance in the narrative that Stedman actually went into convulsions when he saw a fish being broiled, and another time he got upset again after observing other children messing with a chicken. Later in life, Stedman would demand the company of many women of all colors frequently. It was almost as if he bragged about his many sexual encounters in his young adulthood. It wasn't until he met Johanna that he would discontinue to have many women. Johanna, who was born into slavery, was around 15 when Stedman first inquired of her, and it was from that moment that he became clearly emotionally involved. The first time he fell ill, Johanna was there, and the relationship continued to blossom. Once Stedman decided that he loved Johanna, he knew then he wanted to purchase her and give her her freedom so that they could wed and she could be educated. Unfortunately, Stedman never acquires enough money to purchase his dear Johanna, but they do wed and eventually have a son named after Stedman, named John. Throughout the text, Stedman refers to Johanna as a woman that he longs to be with, and each encounter with her is even more connected to this. And each encounter with her, he is even more connected to this woman. As Stedman's time in Suriname ends, so does his relationship or marriage to Johanna. And as enthralled in this relationship that he was, with the stroke of his pen it was over. Stedman returns home and marries another woman and has children. Later, when Johanna dies, about 4 years after, Stedman had already written the close of their relationship. Finally, in summary, what I believe that could be further researched was Johanna herself. There is not much written about her, her family, or her background, and most of what is known of her comes only from Stedman's writings. Would she have felt the same way if she were a free woman? Would Stedman have married her if she had already been free? Or was this simply a marriage of convenience, a Suriname marriage after all?